𝗤𝗲𝗀 took a detachment of 5,000 foot soldiers and 1,000 select horsemen and moved out of the camp by night. Their plan was for the men of the citadel in Jerusalem to guide them to the camp of the Jews, and then they would launch a surprise attack. But Judas heard of their plan, so he and his soldiers prepared to attack the king's forces in Emmaus while the army was divided. When 𝗤𝗲𝗀 reached Judas's camp that night, he found no one there, so he began looking for them in the hills, saying, "They ran away from us." Daybreak found Judas on the plain with 3,000 men, but they lacked the armor and swords they needed. They saw that the camp of the Gentiles was well fortified, with men wearing body armor and horsemen patrolling it. These were trained soldiers. But Judas told his soldiers, "Don't be frightened by their numbers. Don't flinch at their attack. Remember how our ancestors were saved at the Red Sea when Pharaoh pursued them with his army. Now let us call upon God with the hope that he will think of us, remembering his covenant with our ancestors, and that he will destroy this army facing us today. Then all the Gentiles will know that there is one who redeems and rescues Israel." The foreigners looked up and saw Judas's army advancing against them, so they rushed out of the camp to engage them in battle. The trumpet sounded for Judas's army, and they began fighting. The Gentiles were routed and fled across the plain, and their rear guard was destroyed. Judas and his army chased them as far as Gazara and even to Azotus and Jamnia and the plains of Idumea. The enemy lost about 3,000 men. Judas stopped the pursuit and returned with his men. He said to the people, "Forget the plunder. We have another battle to face. 𝗤𝗲𝗀 and his detachment are in the hills nearby. First, stand firm against our enemies and crush them. Then you may take as much plunder as you want." While Judas was still speaking, the enemy was spotted coming out of the hills. But 𝗤𝗲𝗀 saw that the soldiers he left in Emmaus had fled, and the smoke rising from his camp showed that Judas's men had set fire to it. When 𝗤𝗲𝗀's troops saw this, they were terrified. Then they saw Judas and his army in battle formation on the plain, so they all fled into Philistia. Then Judas turned back to plunder the camp. He and his men carried away a great amount of gold and silver, blue and purple silks, and other valuables. On the way home, they sang hymns of praise to God, singing, "He is good, and his faithful love endures forever." So Israel experienced great deliverance that day. The Gentiles who escaped reported to Lysias all that had happened. He was shocked and upset when he heard about it because things had not turned out as he had planned for Israel, and he had failed to fulfill the king's command. So the next year Lysias gathered 60,000 select troops and 5,000 horsemen in order to subdue the Jews. This army marched into Idumea and set up camp in Beth-zur, where Judas faced them with 10,000 men. When Judas saw their military might, he prayed, "Blessed are you, O Savior of Israel, for you stopped the giant warrior by your servant David and handed over the Philistine camp to Jonathan son of Saul and his armor-bearer. Now let this army be surrounded by your people Israel, and let their many soldiers and horsemen become confused. Strike them with fear, and undermine their confidence in their own strength. Give them fear for their own destruction. Let those who love you strike them down with swords so that your followers may praise you with hymns." The opposing forces engaged in hand-to-hand combat, and 5,000 men of the army of Lysias were killed. Lysias saw his men in retreat, and he also saw that Judas's followers were very bold and ready to live or die bravely. So he withdrew to Antioch to recruit mercenary soldiers. Then he planned to return to Judea with an even larger army. Judas and his brothers said, "Our enemies have been utterly defeated. Now let us go up to purify the temple and dedicate it." So all the army was assembled, and they went up to Mount Zion. There they saw the empty sanctuary, the desecrated altar, the gates burned down, the weeds growing in the courtyards as in a forest or on a hill, and the priests' rooms next to the temple in ruins. They tore their garments and mourned deeply, putting ashes on their heads and falling face down on the ground. When the trumpets gave the signal, the people cried out to God. Then Judas sent troops to attack the defenders of the citadel while he purified the temple. He chose blameless priests who were devoted to the law of Moses. They cleansed the sanctuary, and the stones that had been defiled were carried away to an unclean place. They discussed what should be done about the altar of burnt offering, for it had been defiled. Someone suggested that it be torn down so it would not become a lasting shame to them, for the Gentiles had defiled it. So they pulled the altar down and put the stones in a suitable place on the temple hill until a prophet could come someday and tell them what to do with them. Then they took uncut stones, as required in the law of Moses, and built a new altar like the old one. They restored the sanctuary and all the things inside the temple. Finally, they sanctified the temple and its courtyards. They made new sacred vessels and took into the temple the lampstand, the altar of incense, and the table for the bread of the presence. They burned incense on the altar and lit the lamps on the lampstand, which gave light in the temple. Then they set the bread of the presence on the table, hung up the curtains, and finished all the work they had set out to do. On the 14th of December, in the 148th year of Greek rule, they arose early in the morning and offered sacrifices on the new altar of burnt offering, as the law of Moses directed. On the day of the month that the Gentiles regularly defiled it, the altar was dedicated anew with songs, harps, lutes, and cymbals. And all the people fell face down in adoration and blessed God, who had given them success. For 8 days, they celebrated the dedication of the altar, and they joyfully offered burnt offerings, praise, and thanksgiving for their deliverance. They adorned the front of the temple with gold crowns and shields, and they repaired the gates and restored the priests' rooms, furnishing them with doors. The people were very joyful because the disgrace caused by the Gentiles had been removed. Judas and his brothers and all Israel decreed that the dedication of the altar should be celebrated every year with joy and gladness for 8 days, beginning on the 14th of December. They then built high walls and fortified towers around Mount Zion to stop the Gentiles from attacking and destroying it as they did before. Judas assigned a garrison to guard Mount Zion, and he fortified Beth Zur, so that the people would have a defense against Idumea.